The thing about sin, the theology or the doctrine of sin, is that sin cannot be contained in the sinner. My sin is never a private sin. It always echoes out and affects others.
Welcome back to the Today Counts Show with Jim Piper. Be sure to subscribe and follow the Today Counts Show on whatever platform you watch or listen. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Welcome back to the Today Counts Show, and we are back on the road here with our Genesis project. Today, Pastor Matt Martin and myself are going to continue where we left off last time in this conversation through Genesis. We left off on chapter 4 and verse 16, where it says, "So Cain left the Lord's presence and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden." So we're going to start then with verse 17 and the balance of chapter 4. So I'm just going to read through this first section, and Matt and I will get in conversation about it. Of course, you know me, I'll have some things to say as I'm reading through it. It says, "Cain had sexual relations with his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Then Cain founded a city, which he named Enoch, after his son. Enoch had a son named Arad, and Arad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methuselah. Methuselah became the father of Lamech." Okay, I know that was a little tedious, but that'll come into play in a second. Then we go to the next verse. Lamech married two women. The first was named Adah, and the second was Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal, who was the first of those who raise livestock and live in tents. His brother's name was Jubal, the first of all who played the harp and flute. Lamech's other wife, Zillah, gave birth to a son named Tubal-Cain. Don't get lost with me, folks. I'm almost done. He became an expert in forging tools of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain had a sister named Naamah. One day, Lamech said to his wives, this cracks me up how he addresses them. "Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. Listen to me, you wives of Lamech. I have killed a man who attacked me, a young man who wounded me. If someone who kills Cain is punished 7 times, then the one who kills me will be punished 77 times. If you've been following our discussion, if you haven't, let me try to catch you up a little bit. And if you have, let me just remind you all that what we kind of see here is, so Cain has been kind of set out on his own. God has a mark on him to protect him from mortal wounds from enemies who, I think, Matt, you said it in one of our previous podcasts. The thing about sin, the theology or the doctrine of sin, is that sin cannot be contained in the sinner. My sin is never a private sin. It always echoes out and affects others. And so, that's part of what's being taught here. But another thing that's being taught is just how humanistic this part of history begins, where Cain doesn't have a repentant heart, obviously, and he continues to develop this humanistic mindset. Well, how do we know that? Well, I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world to name a city after your son, but you might think he'd have something more creative to come up with, knowing that God has shed mercy, on him. And then, of course, you see what is bred through the genealogy here, where I believe, Lamech would be Cain's great grandson. Lamech would be Cain's great grandson. So we get through those generations, and now we have a guy who continues to write his own rules. He marries 2 women, but with a little bit of study, the names of his wives and his daughter also kind of breed this idea of humanism. Ada means, that's one of the wives, means pleasure or ornament or beauty. So obviously an object of a man's lust. Zillah means shade. So I'm going to guess that has to do. She must have had one heck of head of hair. So if you're into that kind of thing, there you go. There's there, and then his daughter, Nema, is loveliness, loveliness. And then of course it extends to where he murders somebody, brags about it, and then apparently takes a tip from God and almost makes himself God by claiming that, well, if you did this to my great 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 grandfather, then if you do this to me, you're going to be punished 77 times. And of course, we see this in ancient times where men begin to make themselves as God. So pretty scary, how quickly it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, and you've said it so well, with the humanistic mindset. And we'll see it play out even more in the book of Genesis, but you would think, I mean, they are very short removed from creation. I mean, we're only, Lamech would be six from Adam, I guess. And
Right.
so, that is to see how soon a generation, which I think for us, the principle always comes back to as we raise our families, the importance of values in our own families, because they can be so quickly erased and so quickly, moved to the side. And and then really you become, well, grandpa did it that way, but we don't even know why, you know, he believed that or what he did, and then you have a generation that's just removed, and again, especially in a spiritual sense, when it comes to the things of God. And I think that's a little bit, because we're going to see this really run off the rails in chapter 6, but a lot of this, and I think, as Moses is writing this, is helping us set up how hard the fall of humankind was. Like we tend to focus on Adam and Eve, and it's like we just jump somewhere else in Scripture, and everybody was just jacked up. But it fell hard, and it fell fast.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. I think another thing that stuck out at me, kind of a broader idea, Matt, is that it kind of pushes back on evolution
Yes.
when you look at all these talents that came through even the fallenness of this line. I mean, you've got trained, you got people who are already into music and arts, people that are in crafts, have craftsmanship. I mean, we're talking, within 3 generations, just the way that it's described, it's not it's described as simply rubbing sticks together,
Right.
but this is already a society. You could build a city. So you're building a city and you got artists and craftsmen.
To look at I love your angle on that, because it's, a couple of things there. One is, it completely pushes back on the evolution idea. And that, I mean, they're trained, the first the first to live in tents and raise livestock. So there's something there that, we're already understanding the law of the harvest, and we're already understanding the law of husbandry with plants, or with vegetation and with animals. And then just think about it. But look inside this family. You've got one who is living in tents and raising livestock. Then you've got the one who won't come out of his room. He's just in there, he's figuring out how to string up some, whatever, to make a guitar and to make
Well, exactly. These instruments just didn't appear.
No. He created that.
I mean,
and it's stringed instruments, like it what, so And then you have Tubal Cain, who was a metal worker and very skilled in that. So you see this artisan lifestyle among so early. But I think the other thing that it shows is the grandness again of the creativity that God puts in us.
Well, yeah,
And
I mean, where did they get these ideas, right? We've learned that you have a first creation and a second creation. First creation begins in your mind, your imagination, your vision, and then it begins to become more concrete. So was it the wind, and they heard the wind going through the trees, and that created, some music and in their minds, and they begin to try to replicate that, whether it be through harp or flute. I mean, it's pretty interesting, when you
I mean, like, how does it? Now, I'm not a musician, so I have no insight here, and nor have I studied music or music theory. But like, what I'm going to be the guy that's raising the livestock and living in the tents. That's going to be me. That's who I'm going to be.
Yeah.
But like, at what point does he realize if I do these strings this way and it makes this sound? There's just so much going on there that I'm not smart enough to talk about. So that's I do find it. But the bigger idea here is man was not evolving and living in a cave and running out real quick and kill something and drag it back in the cave and hope to survive through a harsh winter. No, they were building a city. They were developing civilization. We see so much of this early on, and I think even more as we get into chapter 6, there's some other stuff that we'll see that even debunks the some of the evolution ideas.
Yeah, let's all notice too that those are kind of clumped in families, right? It talks about they became known as the ones who raising livestock and living in tents, and then the first of all who played the harp and flute. The inference here is that these became family trades, family talents, and we our children learn from us, and it's amazing how tightly talents and learned strengths get handed down. And even though this is a humanistic drive that's going on, that's not necessarily trying to glorify God, it's you still can't hide God in this. To your point that here these people are far from God, yet God leaves intact, as you said, their creativity, their imagination. They're building a city. They're creating music. They're creating a sustainable livelihood. It's pretty amazing. All of seminary for me wasn't a waste of time. Some of seminary was, but one thing that I want to comment on here, because we're going to transition in a little bit to the other lineage of a boy that is born named Seth. And one of the classes that I took in seminary, I was introduced to this idea that I had never heard before. I had heard of a family tree, but I had never heard of a genealogy. And a genealogy is a tool that psychologists use, particularly those that have a spiritual background, a Christian background. And in Christian circles, you might hear of the terms generational curse.
Right.
I don't know that I'm, for or against that terminology. I've heard it. I think that there's something definitely to it. And I guess just the word curse, always makes me cringe. But maybe it is, right? Maybe it is a spiritual curse or a mark or something that starts in here's my point. I've done some novice studies on habits and addictions on one side that are negative, but I've also done studies on habits and practices that are healthy. And there seems to be a strange scientific / we could say spiritual implication that those things, if you will, get sunk into the DNA muscle of a human being and therefore transmit it. I know this sounds kind of way out there, from generation to generation. In other words, it's not that unusual to see a father who has what seems to be a talent out of the blue, and yet the children, or at least some of them, will have the same one. And we say, well, they have good genes. That's kind of how we say it, right? But what's interesting to me is that when you look at Cain, and we said earlier that Cain's great grandson is Lamech, and look where this guy's ending up. And now it seems like Cain's sin and Cain's rebellion and Cain's pride has given birth to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, to where you now have this, what appears to be a larger than life kind of character, named Lamech. And the purpose of these genealogies is that they're informed family trees. So if there's probably not too many families that do this anymore, but I've seen families who have that big family Bible. I mean, that big old thing, I mean, if you got hit on the head, it'll knock you, right? or worse. And you open it up to the front, and you got the births, and you got the marriages, and you got the deaths. And you also have a spot where there's like this org chart, this family tree that kind of shows how one thing's connected. Well, you can visualize that. What they taught us then with the genealogy is that if you're willing to do the work, you inform the family tree beyond the concrete realities: when somebody died, when somebody was born, who they married, who they divorced, those kinds of things. To what you learn about Uncle Lou, that he was a closet drinker. What you learn about, Aunt Susie, and you start learning all these things. And one of the things that genealogy studies have done, they have revealed that though it may not always be true from one generation to the next, you will find that in a family heritage, there tends to be one or two themes that run through it from generation to generation, both good and bad.
Yeah.
And, though the scripture here isn't really saying that, it is.
Yeah.
It is moving, in that direction. You said that there was something you wanted to talk about, maybe with Tubal Cain.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things jump out at me when you see these, these three kids that are mentioned. The father, the one that lived in tents and raised livestock, the musician, artsy one, and then what we would consider a craftsman.
Yeah.
With the metal worker.
Right.
One of the things that jumps out at me is, even as to really, really just simplify this, probably even more than the scripture intends for us to here, but is to notice the ways in which to train up our children. Because you couldn't have, Jubal wanting to play the string instruments. He probably wasn't going to be a good cowboy.
Yeah.
He just probably wasn't. That probably, he probably didn't want to get out there and sleep in the desert. He wanted to, and so as we raise our children, understanding, speaking into the next generation and helping develop their potential. Right. I do believe that is one of the callings as a parent, is that we have to develop, how it is with your children. I mean, had, different ways of thinking and movement and operation, and, what they accomplished and what they did. And same with my kids. And
let's take a brief break from the podcast to let you know that our very own Jim Piper has released a brand new book called Story: The Art of Learning from Your Past. Everyone has a past, but not everyone learns from it. Jim unpacks lessons in this book that help leaders and learners understand the potential our past has to impact our present and future. Be sure to grab your copy of the book Story where books are sold. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
So when I look at it there, but one of the funniest things to me is Tubal Cain. Growing up in the town, in the small town I grew up in, it was a metal fabrication shop called Tubal Cain, and as a kid, like, I just never knew that was actually a Bible name. I thought that's a weird name for a metal fabrication company. I had no idea that was in direct reference to that they were a Christian company, and it's direct. But anyway, so every time I read it, it takes me back to a place of my childhood, and I'm in front of that business. There's. And we've already kind of went through some of that with them, but just the differences in them and that creative ability. and where Jubal, I mean, this is, worship is going to come out of this because God is,
Mm.
there's the instruments, he designed that. It was that cry out of his heart. I think the other thing to look at is, that our giftings are to glorify God and to um, um,
Serve others. Yeah.
others. And,
Yeah.
so all of these things can go back. I mean, because, here you have Jabal who's going in and, whatever he's doing in tents, obviously the children of Israel would, live a long life in tents. What's happening with livestock, that would be part of the sacrifice, part of what's going on. What's happening with the music? There's going to be all of the worship music. My God, we get to the book of Psalms. The whole thing is about music. We get to with Tubal Cain, all of the tools, the craftsmen, the artists in metalworking. So all of these things continue for the rest of time. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting little
Yeah.
side step in there.
Well, and let's don't walk away yet from your wisdom about, though this is obviously not talking about parenting, it's for those who have parented, for those who are grandfathers and grandmothers, we do have a little miles on our chassis. And one of the things that we can encourage those who listen to this, coming back to what you said, is, not only should we notice the uniqueness of each of our children for their good, but if we start focusing on their uniqueness, how God made them, we're going to have more fun raising them. We're going to get more of a kick out of, well, where did that come from? Wow, well, look at that, versus a focus on what they're not. Now, of course, we're not talking about things off center. We're talking about, you might have been a professional golfer and had your dream of your son or your daughter becoming way better than you, when in fact they could give a flying flip about golf. and, and they want to write books, and you, instead of going, what did I do wrong, go, wow, what is God up to here? And that's fascinating that they can write such a paragraph.
Right.
And I'm scared to write a paragraph, those kinds of things. Well, that's great. So unfortunately, we read this part previously about God and Cain having a conversation. Cain still doesn't get it. And obviously there doesn't seem to be, to use that phrase, there doesn't seem anyone who's willing to break that generational curse. And what's odd, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we ever hear from this lineage again. If it's referred to only within the context of what we've read here as a negative example, but we don't hear about this city anymore. We don't hear about any kind of multiplication from there. We just assume that it eventually was swept away, literally, and never came back. So we got one more little section here to wrap up chapter 4. So I think this is put together. I think Moses put this together now to kind of lay this contrast in history. So the descendants of Cain went this way, but now you've got this new character among other children born to Adam and Eve. But it says here now in verse 25, Adam had sexual relations with his wife again. And that doesn't mean, once again. Obviously, they have been birthing children. And she gave birth to another son. She named him Seth. For she said, God has granted me another son in place of Abel. She just flat says it.
Yeah.
God has granted me another son in place of Abel, whom Cain killed. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. Interesting. We have Enoch, and now we have Enosh. We see that played out in the Bible over and over again with similar yet different names, with two different forks in the road, or a fork in the road. At that time, so the prepositional phrase, at that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name.
Yeah, I love a couple translations say it a little different. What I'm in right now, on the end of verse 26 says, "At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord." Uh, obviously, both ways are correct to say that, but I love the language and the idea around that because, well, the scripture spells it out very clearly for us. There was a hole, not only in Adam and Eve's heart and life because of Abel, but there was a hole in humanity, in mankind.
Mm-hmm.
There was something missing, um, and the I guess the second sin, if you would, of Cain killing his brother. But what was his brother doing? His brother was bringing the proper sacrifice, whereas Cain was bringing the selfish sacrifice. And we kind of see that laid out over these. We talked about that humanistic viewpoint. And so, how much of that sacrifice, that proper worship to God, how much of that had literally died off? How much of that had just kind of been pushed to the side? And you look at it as a nation or as a culture, as a family, as a group. It only took a couple generations right here.
Yeah.
And we see, so there's power in this to come back to say, Seth is the one who came back and said, he obviously made some type of sacrifice, some type of offering, some type of worship to God, and begin to call on the name of the Lord. So, a lot of we kind of we don't think of it in this way, but Abel's death not only created heartache for Adam and Eve for losing a son, but it really created heartache for the world because there was no one there to call on the name of the Lord. And we see that played out all through Scripture. Watchman on the wall. Even in the New Testament, talking about the power of a preacher and a pastor. How shall they hear except that that there be one sent. So I think there's a lot of. It was darker than we probably realized it was.
Yeah, there was, I'm sure, times of silent contemplation about what does all of this mean, and there was probably times where anger and frustration. If we can just bring this down to our lives, using our vocal cords to cry, to weep, to protest, to complain, to say I can't go on. I'm so confused. I can only imagine all the different things that were going on in Adam and Eve, and for whatever reason, she knew that this child was a new hope and a new beginning for them and the people.
Yeah. It was. It's. I'd read a phrase. Some people would call Genesis 4:26 the first revival that would happen in the land, if you would, and just. I mean, we're going to see it. We see the results of it in chapter 5, and when we talk about that how dark the world had truly gotten, and how how bad it really was. And so understanding this idea that no matter what's happening around us, and no matter how dark it seems, and this may be regardless if it's crime seems to surge, election years seem to spiral out of control, moral laws and government law, we find all the things wrong, but there's still so much power when we begin to call on the name of the Lord, and we will see things change in our life and in our world. And I don't know, that phrase, since I was a young man, that phrase has always stuck out to me.
There really is an our part and God's part, isn't there? There's my wife and I went and voted today, and um, uh, I can't honestly say that it was an exciting moment. That's from our perspective. Yet we made a choice that we believed represents I hate this term, the greater good,
Yeah.
for what is being dealt with. And then we consciously and spiritually um, bowed our will, and we've done our part, and the stuff that we can't control, we have to trust in this same God that you were describing, that no matter how dark or frustrating or difficult, there is a remnant. There is light. There is a new day, and God is sovereign. He is in control. Providentially, He's doing things way beyond our comprehension.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we just sit back and wait. We are to engage the best way we can. And I think what's interesting here is this text clearly contrasts between a man who continues to run from God and another man who apparently has great curiosities about God,
Yeah.
and therefore brought others with him. It's interesting, isn't it, how two people can come from the same house, and one be curious and interested and um, and leaning and running in one direction, and the other not so. And that's a difficult thing for any home as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because it isn't always 100% that the family goes this way or that way, because sooner or later we all have to make a decision on where we're going. The next chapter we'll talk about next time is kind of what I would call a wide angle catch up to history. We won't read through it word for word when we get to this next podcast, but we'll kind of look at all the years that had passed, and then it brings forth this incredible time in history, which I can't imagine everyone wouldn't want to look into again and again and again, which of course is the Great Flood.
Yeah.
And what all that means. Matt, thanks for joining me today and helping me close up chapter 4. I look forward to us getting into chapter 5, setting the table for when things really get shook up.
Yeah, it's going to be very fun. A lot of interesting stuff.